a live question to the audience, the panel over here, you're free to do that as well. This event is being live streamed. So there's a link that we will periodically throw out onto the Jinnah Institute using the Jinnah Institute avatar, and that can be picked up and streamed from wherever you are. So without further ado, I'm going to give it up to Aziz Sahab, perhaps to kick us off, and just a little bit of commentary on perhaps the Chao Phraya dialogue and the state of Indo-Pak relations, and new narratives and new media, and the way it's shaping how new generations are looking at India-Pakistan relations.
Well, India-Pakistan relations, as far as the official level is concerned, which is the track 1 level, I think things are at the moment a bit at a standstill. If we want to count the positive sides and so to say the glass half full, we can say that at least we are having the diplomatic relations and the embassies are functioning and interaction through the embassies are taking place. But when we talk about the India-Pakistan relations, most of the time we actually are thinking about the dialogue process between India and Pakistan, and a process through which all the outstanding issues between India and Pakistan, including the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, can be discussed and ultimately settled. That process is at the moment at a standstill. There is a bit of a positive development in the sense that at least the Indus Commissioners talk recently took place. Although personally, I feel that this is really ironic that an event like Indus Commissioner level talks, which always took place annually without any hindrance, even at times during the 65 war and 1971 war, that the talks were not suspended, that even those talks at the commissioners level were suspended for a year and finally took place, and everybody was so happy about it that that might be an indicator of better things to come as far as bilateral relations are concerned. I hope that is true. Also, people are talking about that since the preoccupation with the UP elections and Punjab elections and the other 3 states, the state elections now are over. The government and particularly Prime Minister Modi may now have time to pay attention towards taking some new initiatives as far as Pakistan-India relations are concerned. But I personally am not too sanguine about it, because if you read the message felicitations that he sent on Pakistan Day yesterday, he mentioned about that dialogue cannot proceed in an atmosphere of terrorism, and dialogue can't go together. Sorry, that was the words I think he used. And that is exactly the position that India has taken for some time now. Although the issue of terrorism, which is equally important for Pakistan, is something that can only be resolved through talks, not by just waiting to see what happens. So I personally feel that no dramatic initiatives are going to come through as far as Pakistan-India relations are concerned in the near future. But my Indian friends keep saying that, well, Prime Minister Modi is full of surprises and may spring a surprise. I hope that a surprise is sprung and that it is a pleasant surprise and not otherwise. I think I'll stop here and
Zahid sir, before we go to you, Aziz sir, there was a question which Shivam Vij I just saw on the Twitter board, and it ties in with what you were saying. The extent to which social media can be, or new media can in fact be used to set agendas. And in terms of agenda setting, it's not traditionally been something that we've allowed the media that much space in it. It's usually policymakers who set the agenda. But to what extent do you think that is changing? To what extent do you think the media is perhaps driving narratives in India, Pakistan?
I think as far as social media is concerned, it is now has become a very important tool. And particularly, I think it is important as far as India-Pakistan relations are concerned, where interaction among the young people, particularly of India and Pakistan, is not quite possible because of the visa restrictions and other difficulties. So at least they can get in touch with each other and get to know through initiatives like the one that we are having just now, that they can get to know the opinions of people of India and people of Pakistan about the state of relationship and what do they think. Because I think no government can ignore the social media today, and in fact will have to pay attention to what is trending on the social media and what is being discussed and talked about. So that in that respect, it has a very important role to play, just as the track 2 dialogues have, like the one that Jinnah Institute in Australia, India Institute are running, like the Chaupraya dialogue has an important role to play, because in the absence of official level dialogues, discussions take place among people who are experienced and who have access and influence among the quarters that matter. So, so these two mediums do play an important role.
Okay. Zahid Saab, your take on this, and also perhaps if you could speak a bit to the role of new media in times of crises, because you know there's never a moment in which India and Pakistan are not really in a state of crisis, and in some ways, you know, 2016 was about trying to find a new strategic normal. So what space do you see for you know, how policy is not only articulated but also you know, sort of navigating through difficult times, through times of turbulence, which is often what we have to do on the track 2 circuit. To what extent does social media play a role in that?
I think it's very important, like when you're talking about new normal. So new normal is basically that we cannot expect at this point of time that any major breakthrough in relations with between the two countries. We cannot expect actually going back to 2004 to 2007 when things have improved tremendously, and both the countries were engaged in substantive dialogue. And it has also produced some result. Unfortunately, things did not work like that. What I think the positive things, if you ask me, over the last few months, is that level of jingoistic rhetoric has come down. Like a few months ago, if you see that media in both the countries, particularly much more in India, the tenor, the rhetoric was much more, it seemed that the two countries are going to war soon. In fact, actually, it was such an hysteria that it may have driven the government's policy to some extent. But also, actually, Pakistani media was also influenced in that. And we had seen, actually, you know, some of the, not all, but certainly some of the TV channels went completely haywire on that issues. And it happens. I mean, it is, so it's because media plays a huge role in this time. Its power to reach to the maximum number of people. It does have that kind of influence, which we could never expect print media to have. So obviously, the thing is that electronic media can actually influence the thinking of the people. And now we have seen the news, medium, the social media. And it is basically, in the next few years, is going to be much more influential and powerful. Because electronic media can still be controlled to some level, but social media cannot. And I think probably that's the thing. That is, there's also a direct link. The thing is that, as Aziz Saab rightly pointed out, that we cannot expect any major breakthrough. But what is important is much more to bring down the level of rhetoric, particularly in the media, so that actually the governments could have more space, greater space to think out of boxes. The problem is that even if the leadership wants some time to move forward, then actually the influence of media and the public opinion is created by media. So that can become a major obstacle. At this point, I have not said that is the major obstacle. That is not. But it can create a mindset. But the good thing about that, if you see actually what was happening 3 months ago, 3 months it seemed that everything going bad. The two countries cannot live together, even to that extent. The people, the hawks from both sides seems to be dominating the media, not only electronic media, not only print media, but also the social media. That thing has come down, and I think probably I will take it positively. Now, social media is easy, like, for example, electronic media. Pakistan television cannot be watched in India. And similarly, actually, people do watch Indian television here, but it's never easy to get connection. It's not like easily available. So, but social media does not have any boundary. It cannot be. So I think probably in coming years, social media is going to play a major role in creating and influencing the minds.
No, that's great. And Amara, I know that you feel very strongly about the millennial effect as well, that obviously both India and Pakistan have a youth dividend, an increasing number of users who are joining the online space with every year, the extent to which that changes the dynamic. But there are also two questions which, you know, off the Twitter board. I think these were asked by Faisal, who's here in the audience. And I'd like to pose these to you and to the other panelists. The first is that Prime Minister Modi announced his surprise visit to Lahore via tweet. Pak leadership is social media shy. Prime Minister Sharif needs to adapt. I mean, you've worked very intimately in the policy as well. You know how the constraints that, you know, we deal with in bureaucracy also, but we've seen that in recent months the Foreign Office has become slightly more vociferous in its social media presence. But you know, what is your take on the digital media footprint that we have at a government level? Do you think that needs to be enhanced, or do you think that needs to be, you know, perhaps moderated a little more? And then the other question which Faisal has asked is, how can social media play a role in addressing the rise of ultra-nationalism in the region?
Thank you, Fahad. It's a pleasure to be back here again, and I must commend the Jinnah Institute that this time we actually have our Indian counterparts sitting, you know, and are part of the Twitter cafe, which we couldn't manage the last time. So it's good to listen to the voices on the other side and actually see them. To quickly answer your first question, whether the Pakistani government is social media, I beg to disagree. I've been involved a few years ago in actually establishing the social media machinery for the government. I believe the Pakistani government and its spokespeople very effectively use social media. Our ambassadors are using it. You know, our High Commissioner in New Delhi is a very proactive user. Our Foreign Office, not just the office but also the high level officials, they have their own accounts also. And I believe that the political leaderships, all the political leaderships in Pakistan are also using the social media very, very effectively for various political objectives. I think with reference to this particular instance of Mr. Modi using Twitter to announce his Lahore yatra and the Prime Minister not responding back on Twitter, I think this is not a question of ability. It's a question of a lot of, you know, diplomatic and political considerations that that the leader of the state has to keep in mind before he could or he would, you know, respond to something like this. And I think what followed after that tweet announcement and the kind of reception that Mr. Modi received in Pakistan by the Prime Minister, that illustrated, you know, that illustrated the willingness and the positivity that Pakistan demonstrated in accepting the Indian Prime Minister. Coming to a larger point that I want to make here, I think Aziz Saab and Zahid Saab have kind of set the big picture, the big policy, track one, traditional policy, you know, influence over the India-Pak conversation. But I want to highlight here that specifically from the perspective of track two and its direct relation to social media space. In the 1990s and in the 1980s, even until the early 2000s, there was a lot of track 2 traffic.
We'll just get this fixed up and running. Please continue.
I think one of the big things that I'm noticing, and I want to kind of humbly put it on the table considering there are so many young people sitting here, there is very little information amongst the millennial generation that in the 1980s and the 1990s and even you know, until the early 2000s, prior to Mumbai, there was a lot of track 2 traffic between the two countries. And that influenced the beginning of the composite dialogue. A lot of ideas which became part of the composite dialogue were actually the result of a lot of track 2 cooperation between both the countries, the civil society representatives, the media representatives. You know, I still remember SAFMA delegation going to Delhi or coming to Lahore, that would be the biggest news of the day or the week. How much interest and enthusiasm it would generate at the social level, not just at the policy level, but at the social level. To me, a big worry is that what has happened in the case of India and Pakistan is that the social media space is only being dominated by the track one actors on this issue. We don't see the social voices as much that this medium is primarily meant for. If social media is meant to be a game changer, and it has been a game changer in the Middle East, in Europe, in other places, it has been so because the social segments, non-governments, media, youth, artists, they have created activities that social media is used to propagate. Just I think day before, there was the 10th summit on the International Coalition Against Daesh. And the US and all the coalition partners held that big conference. And social media was abuzz with the conversation that was happening in that conference. This is a technical point to understand, that the conversation will become prominent if there is something happening on the ground.
Right.
And people are participating in it. My worry is that right now the exchange between the two countries is so limited to policy statements and to track one actors. The track two actors have kind of, retreated, or they've been forced to retreat. We're not generating enough content, social activity that the social media can be, leveraged for. And that's the big thing, Somebody asked here, I saw the question, what is the one thing that needs to happen immediately to end the deadlock? I would say, in addition to the dialogue, the resumption of the dialogue, get the people to start their conferences, their events, their jalsas, why can't Pakistani politicians go and address student campuses, universities, colleges in India, or vice versa? Why can't we have more literary festivals and more concerts? That's the action place for social media.
I think it's also, let me say, it's also depend on the environment. I was in Delhi in January 2016, and there was something going on in JNU. And when I wanted to go there, the organizers begged me not to go there. So that's basically has also something to do with the atmosphere, whether we can do the things which we were doing earlier. It was something more to do with the changing atmosphere. When you are talking about SEFMA and people or parliamentarians visiting both sides of the border, I could have gone, I went to Kashmir, the other side of held Kashmir. So basically that was possible at that point. But it's also something to do with the environment. I'll just add to one thing about Twitter. It's good to that the world leaders are using it, but basically with excessive use of Twitter to run policy by Twitter, that's also could be very harmful. And that's what exactly happening in United States.
Aziz Saab, if I could just very quickly, because Zahid Saab has raised an important point, and perhaps you can speak to this also. And I mean, the point is this, that social media as an enabler and giving a lot of power to individuals. We've seen that in some ways Prime Minister Modi has been able to reach out and from our side, for instance, if the Prime Minister's daughter sends a tweet back, then sometimes they're able to bypass the old institutional channels of communication which traditionally held or conducted how policy was made, particularly on the India-Pakistan front. So is that a good thing that it can allow leaders to perhaps run away with the plot, or sort of keep, because now things don't need to go from a secretary to a desk officer to a secretary, etc., to get approval. All you need is 140 characters and your message is out there for the other country to see.
That has its inherent dangers also, because I think in certain respects things should go through a certain process. But what Tamara was talking about, the interaction between the civil societies earlier on, SAFMA and so on, I mean, the environment now is so different that it's not possible. Zahid Saab just mentioned about last year. I was in Delhi a week ago, and I was supposed to give a talk at the Jamia Millia, and at the last minute it was cancelled because they received some threats and so on. So the environment is different, and I mean, just think of this, that all the track 2 meetings are taking place at a neutral venue and not in Delhi or Islamabad because of the visa difficulties. Earlier on, all these civil society, whatever little interaction there was, they were visiting each other's countries and influencing opinion there. For example, even for Chhapraya, if these meetings were instead of Bangkok were being held alternatively in Delhi and Islamabad, then those people who would be coming for the meeting would also be able to interact with other local people, a much larger and wider audience, which is not taking place. And this is reflective of the state of relationship, and it is being guided by the official policies. But nonetheless, I think this social media, particularly those who are good at using it, I am not, but it can play a very important role. At least people and younger generation on both sides can interact with each other, discuss things, which would be looked at by the powers that be, who are in the process of in the position of decision making, and have some positive or also negative influences on them.
Amara, coming back to you, there's a question which I think you might enjoy in particular. How can one, and I think this is from the Indian side, how can one free the narratives from one based on partition? I think they're trying to talking about disentangling, political baggage and historical baggage from narratives. Can the present generation build its own narrative? I think this is a question which, Aziz Saab might also like to speak about, because I mean you can't really dismiss the generational factor when it comes to India-Pakistan, particularly given that you have a new cohort of voices who are now contributing to the debate on both sides.
Fahad, it's interesting that you identified the same question that I was looking at, because I found this question to be very pertinent. It is a sensitive question. My reading, whenever I track the conversations, the discourse between India and Pakistan, is that partition remains such a touchy and such a sensitive subject. It elicits a lot of passions on both sides, which is of course a problem. And a lot of the dominant voices are from the older generation who went through it, who saw it, who experienced it, and who have very definitive memories and opinions. Those voices happen to be the dominant voices in the overall India-Pakistan discourse. I think for me, the worry, which Aziz Saab has also identified, is that the younger voices who do not carry the memory or the experience, who could have probably a more objective and neutral perspective on partition, they are not able to come to the platform, or they don't have the space, or they haven't been given the equity. I would say they have not been given the equity to become credible voices that need to be heard. We still think that the conversation on India-Pakistan relations needs to be led by policy elite, and probably the youth voices should be relegated to arts and crafts, and that's their place. Narratives of history, narratives of identity, narratives on violence, these are narratives which have to be passed on to the next generation. Have we cultivated our generations? Have we trained them? Have we given them tools? Have we given them the academic theories on the basis of which they could come up with new and alternative ideas on how to address partition and move beyond? I think for me that's the big question. Somebody said here that we are still teaching children are taught Hindus and Muslims can't live together, indoctrination from young age. I mean, this is a question of education on both sides. So if we are going to address the question of partition, and if we expect the young people, that, oh, they should have new and alternative ideas on this, we need to first and foremost identify how have we overhauled or reformed our education systems.
Right.
You can't expect the young people to be fed something from a childhood age and then suddenly wake up and say, oh, because something is fashionable on social media in the West, or something is politically correct in the West, it probably holds true for us also. It's a different region, it's a different country, a different history. Yeah. and we have to empower them educationally and
Right.
academically to be able to come up with those ideas.
Zaid Saab, I'm going to throw the same thing to you. And extremism is a global trend line, as we know at the moment. And like Amara was saying, a lot of what is taught in schools and is propagated. I mean, Pakistan has, of course, its own challenges when it comes to extremism. But what we've seen in UP in terms of the rise of ultranationalism, and not just with this most recent state election, but this is the saffronization of the polity on the other side, is a worrying trend. And we've seen that social media in some ways and the rise of new media has been an enabler in this process. So to what extent then should we be wary of new media as being the gatekeeper of extremist voices, and to what extent does it give a platform to voices that perhaps are better moderated offline?
Well, actually, this phenomena of extremism, we had actually been confronting this problem for a very long time on a different level. Our problem was that it turned into a violent extremism, and it affected the country itself. But basically, if you see over the years, this is now a global phenomena. From an age actually which about 20 years ago, I think the buzzword or the thing actually which for everyone was moving towards was globalization. And globalization had its own impact. It has actually, made to some extent the boundaries irrelevant. Now actually there's a trend, general trend to actually recreate this national states. And we have seen all over the world. But basically when we're talking about subcontinent, well, actually, what is alarming is also the rise of extremism in India, which is actually very, it must be concern for the Indian themselves, because the very strength of Indian democracy was based on secularism. And once you move that away, and when you try to make it a Hindu Rashtriya, then actually it gets its own problem. The problem with, in Pakistan and India is that basically the history, the distortion of history, what one of our famous historian has targeted, the murder of history. And that has created its own narrative, and which is basically, and it created a mindset. What we are seeing today in Pakistan, the rise of extremism is largely the result and outcome of what we are being taught in schools. And that is where actually, because history should be read as a history, unbiased history. And when you try to give it actually on your own interpretation and try to impose on the people, then you create this mindset. And I think probably we are confronting this problem, but it is also a problem in India and Pakistan, that what we call spillover effect, like rise of extremism in one country can also actually, in fact, influence the reaction on the other side. It also happens that way. Like, for example, when people are reading here what happened in UP election, and an ultra right person being appointed or being elected as chief minister, you could see actually the right wing, on social media, or even look actually what we have been saying. I mean, they felt validated by whatever actually it is. So I think probably this is a quite serious danger, and I think the major thing how to you build the young minds, and whether they are being taught something which actually fuels extremism. Look, actually, the if you go to any school, or people who have come out, or basically people who had been taught in that particular curriculum, which started actually way back in 1980s and onward, their mindset, and the people who had actually read different kind of courses taught a different way, they had a much more different mindset. So that's what actually the rise of extremism is directly related to what we are being taught in the schools.
Aziza, one question for you, and it didn't come up on the board, but I know we've talked about this privately in the past also, is the role of disinformation. And it's something which is quite serious, because in an age where you're talking about surgical strikes and you're talking about LOC ceasefire violations. There's a tendency for a lot of white noise and static to be generated, not just on social media, but also, on primetime television, what's being said by TV anchors on the 8 p.m. live hour when everybody is tuning in to get their daily feed of what the state of play is between India and Pakistan. And then, to what extent then does that become a complicating factor when you're trying to, disentangle alternative facts from what the actual truth that is out there, and you're trying to, genuinely and honestly, transmit or telegraph your state narrative. Sometimes it gets lost in the noise of talking heads. More so on the Indian side, I would say, than on our side. Our media tends to be a little more rational and level-headed. But on the Indian side, there's a particular tendency to otherize Pakistan very quickly and jump the gun. We saw this after Pathankot, and we saw this after Uri. So, I mean, what's your take on this?
Yeah, actually, electronic media, because of competition or whatever factors there may be, the business aspect of it, whatever it may be, tends to be a little more nationalistic than it is healthy for their own country. They all become chauvinistic. They all start talking about one step ahead of the other channel, and that sort of has a kind of an acceleration effect of making the wrong kind of noises as far as the relationship between the two countries is concerned. And obviously, people on social media also get influenced by that narrative, because they, after all, their source of information is, since the people on either side are not interacting with each other, that becomes the medium through which they gain their information. But otherwise, I think I'll give you two examples. One, for example, when I was there, and there was a period where things were a little normal between India and Pakistan, a lot of the delegations of young people from schools and colleges, Indian schools and colleges visiting Pakistan and vice versa. And I used to interact with them once they would return from after a visit to Pakistan. And all the Indian school or college students would say that, but Pakistan was very different from what we imagined it to be. And that is what is required, that they get some kind of a process through which they can get that correct picture. Number two, you were talking about the partition generation and so on. Anyway, that generation is passing away, and it is hardly very few left who have remembered partition or have experienced partition. But among the younger generation, again, it is only because they are not interacting with each other that this kind of a hostility is developed. Look at the Indians and Pakistanis in the US or UK or Europe. They are thick as thieves, all friends, partying together, meeting together. Nobody is talking about the wounds of partition, and nobody is talking about that kind of a nationalist rhetoric that is talked about locally. So I think it is the official line that influences the rest of the thing. But nonetheless, at least through interaction through social media, the younger generation can interact with each other, and hopefully, instead of reflecting the official narrative, if they can give their own views and opinions to the youth on the other side and interact about how to improve things and how to make things better. I think that is a part where social media can play a very important role, and should be in some way or the other guided to play that role. For example, an interaction like this can then project things in a better light, and if there are more of such interactions, perhaps we can make up for the loss of direct communication that we have.
I think the worst thing happened over the last few months, I would say negatively, is that the lack. Yes, that's the major problem, that what people understand about Pakistan, the perception of Pakistan and India is very different from what the reality is. But what happens actually when you open up your communication, or also actually, like, for example, exchange of films or dramas, Pakistani. So it also helps in changing the perception about that. And that was the greatest victim, because when the tension mounted after Uri and Pathankot, they basically have a tendency to close their doors Pakistan, actually stopped showing Indian films. I think probably that has opened, but still, India has not happened. And one of the biggest, actually, medium to understand was Pakistani dramas being showed, and it used to get actually a different perception about Pakistan, because generally it's not about India also. Generally, whenever they show Pakistan in any documentary particularly, they show Pakistan in madrasas and reading Quran like this, or actually donkey cart going on the street. So that also actually create a complete different and distorted picture of a country.
Yeah.
I think Shivam Vij had just tweeted a while ago that I think Pakistan's biggest brand ambassador in India at this moment is probably Coke Studio, and I think that it's a big. Sorry. Well, I mean, in a more positive
They are competing.
light,
They are competing
more
for
positive
influence.
light.
Yeah.
And the point is that, I mean, it's an important component of soft power that can't really be dismissed or shouldn't be dismissed, because in terms of changing narratives on both sides, plays an important part. We had some videos sent in. I think we're trying to play one right now.
Saroop is.
This is Saroop Ijaz, who is also on the task force, Twitter task force with Amara. Is the volume?
Is he live?
He's just sent.
Periscope? Is that Periscope?
Inviting me, and I am very sorry for being unable to make it there. I would have loved to be there. The topic. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me, and I am very sorry for being unable to make it there. I would have loved to be there. The topic of discussion today, which is how the millennial generation, both in India and Pakistan, are using new media to interact, to engage, and how that might inform bilateral relations. I think it's very obvious how that's becoming more and more relevant every day. What we are seeing is unprecedented level of engagement between younger people, particularly from both sides of the border, both India and Pakistan. That engagement, of course, has the usual fissures, the usual tensions, but for a large part of that engagement is people realizing common ground in terms of some shared history, culture, but also more broadly, some common principles of humanity, some common challenges of modernity, of the rise of right wing, of tackling religious extremism, and realizing that's shattering, in my view, a lot of the stereotypes that people have held about each other across the border. And my view is, even with the hate, viciousness that we see online, I think the engagement bit, realizing.
We have an internet problem. I think we've gotten a sense of what Saroop's point is. And Amara, because you were on the Twitter task force with him on alternative narratives, not only his point about how messages are amplified within this certain online space, but I know something that you and Amal brought up quite strongly was the role that gender plays in when you're talking about policing, and policing particularly in the context of the activity that goes on in social media spaces. I think it was Janzeb who mentioned that you now have an increasing number of women in Pakistan who are actually pretending to be men online, so as to avoid the abuse that comes their way just by virtue of their gender. So, I mean, how important do you see this gender component as something that should be taken into consideration when we're talking about not only generating alternative narratives, but also in, I think, policy more broadly in the context of India-Pakistan relations?
Very important question. Incidentally, I don't know how many young people in the room may be familiar with her, but Kamala Bhasin, who's a very senior feminist of South Asian region, and who for decades has worked with feminist leaders from Pakistan. They've worked together to produce academic work on explaining gender in South Asia, and then doing practical work on the ground. She was in Pakistan earlier this month actually. She was here to, commemorate the passing away of Nigar Ahmad, the late Nigar Ahmad, who was a pioneering women's leader in Pakistan. And I had the opportunity to interview her for a leading English monthly magazine. And we discussed this very issue about how the feminist movement, the women's movement in South Asia, especially in India and Pakistan, it is facing challenges because the millennial generation probably does not have that lived experience or collaboration because of the tensions now. You know, women, the second generation women or the millennial generation women who could be involved with gender discourse and gender work, they have just not visited each other's countries. They have just not undertaken that kind of collaborative effort that Nigar and Kamla were able to do. And what it means for the future of feminist movement, or what it means for the future of gender issues. My fear is that, I mean, it's good to see a heightened gender awareness in Pakistan. It's good to see that we're now talking about cyber security for women and legislation to protect women but it's just national. It's within the country. It's the same in India. But what about the regional, feminism as a regional question? How do you translate that feminist consciousness to questions of peace, to questions of cooperation between the two countries, to questions of brotherhood and sisterhood between the two countries, which has been the domain of the civil society, the domain of the track 2. I think we really need to be careful to assess the power of social media. It is a platform, it's a fantastic channel, but it cannot be the end. There is no substitute. I think Aziz Saab put his finger on the most important point. There is no substitute for real-time, face-to-face interaction. There is no substitute for visiting each other's countries, getting to know, your friends or your enemies on there. I have lots of friends, Indian friends, who are now in senior positions. As a former, I visited their country. We had shared experiences. We would argue, we would disagree, but at the end of the day, we would enjoy Golgappas, and we would enjoy Golgappas in Delhi Haat. We have that experience of being friendly with each other while having political debates. My worry is that the young people, they know each other through the screens, but that lived experience of having so much more in common, of being human with each other, laughing, crying, debating, that can only come when you are in each other's countries, and that is the big casualty. I think this is something that social media can be utilized. Initiate signature campaigns, initiate demand calls on social media to ask the governments, put pressure on the governments, initiate signature petitions, allow young people to visit each other, initiate programs, university programs, college programs. This is where this medium can be used effectively, because otherwise the interaction would remain limited and not wholesome.
And just on that point, and maybe Zahid Saab, you can chip in on this, is that, we mentioned this earlier, that a lot of this is of course a function of the political climate and the space that is available on both sides, and of course the space in Pakistan at the moment is very different in terms of compared relative to the space that's available in India, particularly when it comes to civil society and the space that there is to even to talk about peace. There was some story this morning, I forget what exactly, but somebody in UP was arrested or flogged for having left a Facebook post about Yogi Adityanath, who's the new chief minister. Whereas on the Pakistani side, I think we tend to be a lot more open about the conversations that we have, at least on some subjects. And India bashing has never gained much traction in Pakistan unless you venture into certain forums. So Zahid Saab, in terms of that dynamic being very different on this side of the border and compared to what we're seeing on the Indian side, do you think there's less space perhaps on the Indian side for these sorts of conversations about taking relations with Pakistan forward?
Well, actually, space is created by the public opinion also and our government policy. It's not in a vacuum. People do not actually, yes, they are also influenced by this. So I think probably, yes, over the last 1 year, we have seen much more jingoistic actually, trend in the social media from India. But I think to other extent, Pakistan also started losing, Pakistani started losing space. But what is the biggest threat? One thing is good about that so far, the social media is not under the government's control. That's a positive thing. Maybe actually sometimes we feel actually, oh my God, actually there's such things come in the Twitter and Facebook and social media. There's much more negative stuff. But this is basically a kind of thing we have to accept, because when you are, this is struggle. A struggle for minds and souls of the people. Then you expect that this kind of political dialogue takes place. But what my fear is that this space is being restricted in Pakistan now.
In fact, there's a tweet which ties, what if the Islamabad High Court announces to block
That's
Facebook
what I'm
and
saying.
Twitter?
That basically, well, actually, I think one cannot condone or justify some irresponsible behavior from some people. But basically to use that to actually deprive other section of population this medium, that will be very, very dangerous. And I think probably if it happens, then actually whatever freedom of press we have, that will go. And I think probably it is also going to influence the politics of this country. We will see more extremism, because what happens, in fact, actually when you go to social media, I always find the right-wing thoughts are dominating the discourse. But I'm not afraid of that, because it also gives me a space. And ultimately, actually, I feel that we have much stronger argument to influence the minds of the people. But when you shut this thing, then I think probably there will be a lot more problem. And they have taken a weapon, which is very sensitive. Sensitive, they're actually using religion for that purpose. And I think this is the biggest danger in this country. And if they do so, I think they are going to further restrict the space for rational thinking.
That would be a very dangerous kind of a development. I mean, we are a chattering people. Now we are not allowed to meet each other and chatter with each other like you mentioned. We used to do our Golgappas. Now we are at least restricted to twittering. And even if that is stopped, then it will be
no oxygen.
It will be absolutely tragic.
Aziz sir, just on, you've been on the track 1 circuit, you've been on the track 2 circuit for many years now. You'll recall in December 2015, the NSAs and the foreign secretaries met in Bangkok. It was a very closed door sort of meeting, and that initially sort of paved the way for the conversation to sort of get back on track before it was derailed again. But I wonder how you see this, if there's any space really left for such a thing as back channel or behind the doors, closed door diplomacy anymore, because there's obviously the media is so hungry for information all the time, and it only takes a single tweet to go viral that it's almost impossible to keep a secret either in India or Pakistan. So I mean, do you think in terms of obviously having conversations away from the glare of the media has its advantages? There's a lot less pressure on the interlocutors who are in the room, whereas everything gets sort of hyped up, and we saw this happen at UFA also, where it's so much, you build up the pressure to a certain level that the expectations on both sides are enormous, and then the media has a direct stake in the outcomes that come out of these meetings. So I mean, do you think that the space then for closed door behind the scenes back channel diplomacy is reduced as a result of all this traction and all this play that social media is getting?
See, the back channel has a very specific purpose. Back channel should only be utilized sparingly and only for very difficult issues which cannot be discussed in public for reasons that it may be misreported or something. But that should be restricted only to a very few sensitive subjects. Otherwise, the discussion should be open and normal. Cultural relations, you don't require back channel for cultural relations. For trade talks, you don't require back channel for that. I mean, there are so many issues between India and Pakistan which need to be discussed in the open channel and not in the back channel, so that the public is aware of what those issues are and what is being discussed about that issue. It's only I mean, for example, in Pakistan recently back channel was being used only for discussing that specific 4-point CBM that was being discussed between India and
Right.
Pakistan about Kashmir.
Kashmir,
So,
right.
and that also, it was only for the initial phases. After that, it had to be discussed in the open forum. So that way, I think we should not. A back channel is important, but it should be limited to some very sensitive topics. For example, I personally feel that a lot of discussion on cooperation, how to get rid of terrorism, and the difficulties we have with each other regarding that, needs to be discussed in a quiet back channel manner by the experts.
Yeah.
That is a very sensitive subject. So to that extent, yes. But all other issues between India and Pakistan, I personally feel, should be discussed in the open channel, which would give rise to people to know what is being discussed and give their opinion through exercises like these.
Last summer, what went down in Kashmir with Burhan Wani, the ability of social media in particular to create cult personalities and perhaps mobilize people at the grassroots level, which is not something that we had seen so openly before. I mean, a lot of the unrest in Kashmir is indigenous, and it's very different from previous trends of what we've seen, how the dynamic has played out on the ground in Kashmir. I know you feel very passionately about the Kashmir cause, and you spoke about Kashmir at the last Chao Phraya dialogue. So I mean, social media and what's taking place in the valley, where's the disconnect, and where is the overlap?
Very good observation. The K word has not surfaced so far. I do see the T word, but I don't see the K word so far, and I think that is the problem. That when the conversation between India and Pakistan starts happening, we try to avoid the conversation on Kashmir as much as we can, and we want to make the conversation about other things. And I don't want to, I mean, we don't have the time right now to get into why this has happened, unfortunately. It does not mean that Kashmir is not, it doesn't have a presence on social media. I mean, I am getting my first-hand information about what's happening inside Kashmir from social media, from online media. It has become my primary source of information. I mean, I can list Kashmiri academics, Kashmiri civil society activists, Kashmiri feminists, you name it, and they're here. They are making their voices heard. They are talking regardless of whether Indians and Pakistanis want to listen to them or not. It's a structural problem. I mean, if you want Kashmir to be addressed, make it part of the dialogue. If we are having this Twitter cafe about the India-Pakistan relations, put it in the structured conversation. Okay, so, bring Kashmiris on, make them part of the conversation. It can't just be Indians and Pakistanis. Make them bring Kashmiris from both sides of the LOC. Make them part of the conversation about how they feel. Whether they think social media has made any change for them. They are probably better positioned to answer your question on the personality cult than I am. Because they are the ones who are following the youngsters. They are the ones, they have the youth. They are the ones who create the social media accounts, and then they follow them. So it is important to bring them into the conversation. I mean, I am very clear. From day one, I am very clear. If the Kashmir issue has to be resolved by the two countries, bring the Kashmiris on the table, make them part of the conversation. If that has not happened at the track 1 level, at the track 2 level, at least make that happen on the social media sphere. Let's listen to them. Let's listen to them and how they negotiate with us. What are their talking points? It's important, and I think this gives you a very good space. Social media gives you a space where you can bring in Kashmiri voices and listen to what they have to say about the issue.
Zaid Saab, there's a tweet here which says that India accuses Pakistan for terrorism in India and Pakistanis blame them for supporting separatist movements. I mean, at some level this then becomes a game of ping pong in which it's just back and forth. How do you then separate the wheat from the chaff and have a constructive conversation on social media? Is that even possible? I know you have like a large Twitter following, and you tweet selectively, but you at least every day you have some tweets, and I'm sure you get a fair amount of abuse also, depending on which side of the debate you're on.
Yeah. No, actually that is part of the deal. When you are actually engaging people on the social media, you can get that kind of reaction too. And I think probably it's healthy because it is basically what I expect. people have their own views. Well, actually, one reality, we are all sitting here, a reality is that the two countries have been engaged in covert war for last 2 decades. And that's, they have different kind of, one can talk about it. There's a lot of talk about Pakistan's involvement in Kashmir. Well, actually, but there are also strong evidence actually that the Indian covert activities have also been going on. And that is basically a very serious issue. The problem is that, well, actually, this is general theory, that with both the countries getting nuclear, the threat and danger of a full-fledged war is basically has minimized. So what happens in this situation that probably the countries tend to engage in more of the non-conventional warfare, which is, I say, and that that's very dangerous, because it's not, if some terrorist attack takes place in Mumbai or other places, people are blamed from here. Well, actually, there's some substance to it. And similarly, what happened in Balochistan, they may not be actually direct involvement of, but basically some kind of covert operation is going on. So that should come, and I think probably whenever the two countries engage in substantive dialogue, this issue should be dealt, I think probably on a priority basis. Because then actually there is a room and a space for, but basically again, that's get much more complicated what Kashmir happening. So we should also not get actually carried away with this. Sometimes what happens actually then the genuine, people's movement gets actually, compromised or whatever actually that provides there are two aspects. Yes, there has been involvement of Pakistan. There's no doubt about that. There has been people going inside. But then there's also aspect of it that there's a genuine movement also, and which cannot be denied. So that I see. But social media, yes, actually that issue will keep coming up, and I think probably that will be a healthy discussion and dialogue. Actually, one has to, instead of just blaming each other, when there's also should be a serious discussion about the hazards of this kind of non-conventional war. Actually, in the long term, that is much more damaging for both the countries.
We haven't taken any questions from the audience. We have around 30 minutes left. So if I think we should be able to field at least 3 or 4 if you can just introduce yourself. But Aziza, before we do that, I very quickly want to say your friend Ambassador K.C. Singh has sent a message in which he says dialogue is a much maligned word in South Asia. We should simply say talking. Yes, India and Pakistan need to talk at multiple levels and on an open-ended agenda. So I mean that's something which, if you care to respond at all.
You can rephrase
if they want to call it talking, I'm quite happy with that. Dialogue also was a word proposed by India as in the form of composite dialogue, and we said, all right, we'll call it composite dialogue. Now if they say comprehensive talking, we can call it comprehensive talking, or freewheeling talking, or total talking, complete talking, whatever they want to call it.
All right. Yes, please.
So we're talking about cultural engagements on both sides, but this rise of religiosity on both sides, it has, already has diminished that opportunity. Basant in Pakistan is now a Hindu festival, Baisakhi is a Sikh festival, and on Indian side you see this love jihad and all that kind of stuff. So they are not allowing their people, like in Pakistan, even you are not allowed to interact with your, fellow youth or fellow people on the basis of culture, and the same is being done in India. So how do you see in this kind of situation and this kind of atmosphere, we can use this culture as a tool of engagement?
I think culture still can play a very important role as tool of engagement, and in fact, just look at the popularity of your singers and so on. Despite the fact that they cannot go there, despite that, their record, I mean, their CDs are sold there and people are listening to that. Coke Studio was one thing that was given as an example. Now, ban on Basant is, I don't think it is because of religion. I think there were some other reasons for that, and not out of religiosity. Baisakhi was never really celebrated in Pakistan, but I think these festivals, I mean, would play a very important role. The cultural exchanges are important, and and they have become a casualty to the non-dialogue process. Despite that, I think something needs to be done where it can be promoted, and should be promoted. They will still play a very important role.
Amara has a two-finger on
Yeah.
this, and then I think Salma has a question in the audience.
I think you also tweeted your question about the role of media, you know, and I think this question about the rise of religious or the right wing, I think the media has a huge role to play. You know, it's interesting, the fact of the matter, at least in Pakistan, is that the religious political parties still do not have the number of votes to form governments, you know, and that's a reality. It is interesting that vitriolic statements get splashed as breaking news, as, you know, front page news, because it's sensational, it sells. But culture is not front page news. Culture and people to people interaction, mostly they're metro section news. And as a former editor, as a former journalist, I have often wondered about this myself. You know, if the media, you know, you tweeted that, you know, media is contributing to the rise of tensions. It's the nature of the beast. You know, you're doing your job, whatever is news, you report it. But beyond that, if we are worried that the religious, you know, the vitriol is on the rise, then what are institutions doing? You know, how is media kind of giving equal space, if not more space, equal space to culture, you know, on the front page or headline news or breaking news? If Kamala Bhasin came to Pakistan, why was it not front page news? Why was it not breaking news? She was just in the metro section. I mean, and she was here to commemorate the death of a leading icon who also was not, you know, front page news for many newspapers. So I think media has played a very crucial role in, you know, bringing the relations here, wherever we are. We have a lot of gains, and media has been a major actor in propelling the peace dialogue, major actor. You know, but it can't be on the retreat. It cannot limit itself to just focusing on the negatives, just focusing on the vitriol. Give space to those who are in this environment of insanity, who are trying to be voices of rationality, who are trying to be voices of sanity. If we don't give space to them, then there will be fatigue, which in my humble opinion is the case now. People who try to voice for peace, there is a fatigue setting in, and that's a question for the media also.
Professor Salma Malik?
I don't have this. I have a few comments. Can I?
Yes, of course.
First of all, when we're looking at social media, I feel that social media is an open space which also provides more space or allowance to ultra-nationalists, rightists. Anyone can pick their post and do whatever they need to. So I guess it's as good or bad as we make it feel. And just last week at my campus, I teach at Quaid-e-Azam University, and for the past 2 years, in response to what On has said, our students have been holding holy functions. They like it because it's color and it's throwing of water and it takes them away from the class. But I technically feel, and I'm very liberal on this, but I technically feel we are still not prepared. We haven't taken that extra mile where we can accommodate a lot of people feeling disturbed about a holy function in an Islamic campus. And if there's a backlash, it's going to be a very, very bad backlash, something akin to what has happened at Punjab University, although the flavor and the things were different. Many times when we want to physically interact with the Indians, they would call us, we would do everything, and lo and behold, you don't get your passport back. So what do? You end up Skyping. You present your paper through Skype. So that's a substitute space that you have. It's good, but it takes away that real-time interaction from people. And Amara and I have done a lot of those real-time interactions, and now that interaction is becoming so limited because, especially for a person who comes from a public or a governmental organization, going through the hassle of 2 months long NOCs and permissions for just a 2-day interaction is actually an overkill. So you don't really feel like doing that. And I'm sorry, last but not least, the dramas are actually one of our best exports that one can make. They're dying for that. But interestingly, there was a mention about the partition situation, and I've done a study on the partition narrative, especially when it comes to the cinema. And I feel that in the initial decades, the feeling of being the partition being wasn't that reinforced as it has become reinforced over the generations. Because those who suffered the partition, they knew the goods and the bads. And there was a sense of belonging, but there was not that much of a bitterness. The bitterness has creeped in over the second-hand narrative that has been passed on through generations. And that is something that we need to look at.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Aziza, would you like to respond to any of those comments? I mean, you've said this before also. There was a time when we had daily flights, and air connectivity was something that obviously helped communication between India and Pakistan.
It's the question of direct interaction between the two sides, and if more people, and particularly among the youth, if more people can come and visit each other's country and see what it is all about, I think that would play a very important role. But I don't see the likelihood of that happening very soon, because that will be dependent on the state of bilateral relations. And at the moment, this relationship is at its lowest point practically. But I think if people can utilize the social media and make a lot of noise about it possible that relaxation of visa regime, and in fact even should go to the extent, I mean, the younger people should talk about abolition of visa between the two countries.
Yep.
And I suppose if a relentless effort is made, actually there is a reason for that also. Poor Prime Minister has made several attempts in that direction, but there has never been a positive response from the other side, from across the border.
No, I'm talking
and
about...
that is where people get annoyed here, that why are we constantly doing that? I think...
it was nothing to do with India-Pakistan. He's been blasted actually to making this statement on Hindu and...
Holy.
What the Interior Minister is doing, he is actually aiding and abetting that judge, Shaukat Siddiqui. I can be held for contempt of court here.
Well, I was going to say, be careful. It will be both blasphemous and contempt of court.
I said
Double jeopardy.
I said on the TV that yesterday.
Yes, true.
We have one, this is Shivam Veg, and this is the Twitter cafe which is taking place in Delhi right now.
That's what I call a cafe.
Where is our cafe?
Our cafe comes very...
Changing whose mind what way, you may never know, you won't be able to
we have the volume?
decipher or quantify. But I think this is part of public discourse, and everything has impact on it.
Was it a question or what was can you play it again?
Did they hear us?
Well, they're watching us on the live stream.
They were?
Yeah. It's a lot of food.
Video you posted on Facebook is changing whose mind what way, you may never know, you won't be able to decipher or quantify. But I think this is part of public discourse, and everything has impact on it.
Well, I think it's just a passing comment on the role of public discourse on both sides. Do we have another question from the audience? Ji.
My question is that Mr. X's, sorry, I forgot your name. Sir, Mr. Aziz. Mr. Aziz Khan mentioned that from both sides there is lack of traffic of people who wants the relationship to become better. But have anyone, thought about it, that why there is lack of traffic, why there are few people. Because just look in our premises, we have very little literacy rate. Right now we are sitting in this room, and there would be no more than 1 or 2% of such people in Pakistan who are using these all social media and everything to get knowledge. Most of the people are rural and tribal in Pakistan. Like, I'm from Balochistan, and the youth of Balochistan over there have an impact that once they are affected by Afghanistan, and what they hear just on a radio 105, that it's due to Indian intervention. If India is not able to intervene within the boundaries, it goes to Afghanistan, and then they strike from there. And once they are, a few weeks happens, they get relief from Afghan attacks and all that. Then over there in Pakistan, the direct Pakistan and Indian bilateral issue starts and it erupts. And those people over there have no access to any social media or such thing. So, I mean, such a nourished brains like we are having under this room, rather than thinking a lot about social media, what about if we think about fixing the ground level first, so that we should have a plenty of people wanting light, wanting for peace.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That comes, you're talking about more education and so on. I think that is what it boils down to. But nonetheless, as far as use of social media is concerned, look, there was a time when, not too long ago, when very few people used cell phone. Now look at the number of people who are using the cell phone. Similarly, slowly and gradually, the use of Twitter, and I'll admit I'm not very adept at it myself. So these are things that gradually, as time passes and people get more and more familiar with it, they will become common. And even in Balochistan, for example, at least in Quetta and these places and some urban centers, people must be familiar with it, and as the trend catches on, would be able to use it. Yes, as far as the news that they hear and so on is concerned, that is unfortunately a reality that I think should be known in any case. This is not that if that should be put under cover. If India is interfering in Balochistan and there is solid evidence about it, after all, we have one gentleman who has been singing like a canary that he was working for when he was Gulbashan Yadav. So there is solid evidence of that interference. We cannot brush it under the carpet. In fact, we should discuss that also and discuss how to go about that such things don't happen, and the two sides eliminate that.
But as our discussion was today on the millennial generation, don't you think that majority of Pakistan millennial generation is not now, they are not going to be part of, like most of the millennial generation, they have been kept back. They didn't step forward till this stage of all this peace talks and all.
I agree, it is because of the pathetic state of education in
like,
the country. But
you mentioned that.
आप ज़्यादा इस पे comment कर सकती हैं.
With your permission, sir. I'd like to respond to, I think it's a very important question that our friend has raised. It's a myth. It's a modern myth that a bulk of Pakistan's population is rural.
Yes.
Factually, it's no longer correct. If you look at the statistics, it's almost half and half. The urbanization of Pakistan is one of the biggest socio-economic stories. And I think we need to be very careful when we talk about numbers. My suggestion to Jinnah Institute is that in the next Twitter cafe, we should use a slide to demonstrate the very fast growth of digital media in Pakistan. It's in double digits. It's not 1%, it's not 2%. It's currently standing, at 30 million plus users, and every year there is a double-digit growth. Of course, of 180 million, but we're talking double digits. We're not talking single digits. We're not talking 1 million, 2 million. We're talking millions here. You're from Balochistan. I don't know how much you follow the presence of Balochi political actors on Twitter. I mean, it's huge. A lot of the Balochistan dissent voices are very effectively using social media to internationalize the conversation. You know, it's those who are following that conflict can comment on this authoritatively, how it has been used. I think it is very important to start putting figures to this conversation. I maintain, I gather data on the use of social media in Pakistan, and I think it's important that we bring ourselves up to speed on how much it's growing on, you know, urban as well as, you know, the semi-urban parts of Pakistan.
But the voices you're talking about, the political figures or whosoever are using social media actively, as you mentioned few minutes back, that those are those same old dominant voices, but the masses are still not on the same ground.
No, that is not my reading. I have a lot of young people who are my followers on Twitter from KP, from Balochistan, from FATA, from Swat, from Kashmir, and I don't have that many followers as Zahid Saab has. You know, if we can just do a kind of a tracking of his followers, you will be amazed to see the amount of young people who follow authoritative voices like, you know, Zahid Hussain Saab. So I think there is data which is being maintained and which is being gathered on the use of digital media in Pakistan. And I think I suggest I can share the data that I have on me. You know, we should be sharing that with the audiences.
So that's a great recommendation. And I'd just like to, I think, plug here that Amara is currently part of a task force that is operating along with our Indian counterparts that is going to come out with quite a cutting-edge report looking at how alternative narratives and millennial voices are increasingly shaping India-Pakistan relations. And we have some solid contributions there. I think the chapter that Jahanzeb is in fact writing has a lot of data in it on Facebook and Twitter users, and also on the extent to which these voices are being amplified in the digital space. We're into our last 10 minutes. And I think it would be nice if we could perhaps just go around the panel one last time and take away your you know how you see India-Pakistan relations over the next 12 months, because that's the calendar we're usually left to sort of deal with. How do you see India-Pakistan relations unfolding, and any recommendations based on the conversation that we've had today, some of the ideas that have come off the Twitter board about how can social media perhaps be leveraged, or if it should be at all, to help make this conversation more conducive and constructive in the long run. Zisab?
As I mentioned earlier, I don't see very bright prospects of dialogue, at the official level, the dialogue process moving forward. At the same time, as I said earlier also, that the social media, the people using the social media can influence the governments if they really genuinely feel that the two sides should move forward, should have the dialogue process started. They should talk about it, they should discuss it, and they should urge their respective governments that the only way forward is through a civilized dialogue process.
Great. Zahid Saab?
Well, I think social media is one of the medium which could be used to influence the environment. We are not policymakers. But certainly, actually, this is one of the strongest media that could influence the public mind. And, well, actually, it may be right, actually, the majority of people may still not be using. But actually, over the last few years, as Amara has rightly pointed out, that there has been a rapid increase in that. Everyone has that. But I think probably we have much greater challenge at home. I think probably the problem is two-sided battle. One, actually, we have to fight out this mindset here. Just reading this. So one, if this kind of situation is basically a backlash from these elements, and I think probably we have to fight first actually this mindset at home. And then actually we can influence the minds of others. And it's a very dangerous situation. But basically I think probably, I will always say that I'm not that pessimistic about this. It's a defining moment. When this kind of things come up, this kind of discourse we see, that is brings actually what are the conflicts and fault line within the society. So I think so through social media we have to fight this battle as
Amara, the new age for Indo-Pak relations?
I'll be very frank. I am worried. I'm a Generation Xer. I'm not a millennial. And last month, McKinsey released a global report that Generation Xers are using social media more than millennials. The number was higher by a few percentile, but actually the bigger users of social media are Generation Xers and the older generation, not the millennials. Because of the politics of the social media.
Right.
And to me that's an indication, a lot of us privately we feel that the millennials are apolitical. They are ahistoric. They have not carried that historicity or that, that we probably bring to the conversation. I mean, you can criticize us, you can contest it. I would want this to be contested, but that's the impression that the generation before the millennials hold. And that also explains the influence on the discourse between India and Pakistan. My worry is that if the millennials do not have FaceTime interaction, if there is no direct stake made for them in this relationship, the question for them would be, is it even relevant for my life, whether the two countries talk to each other or not? It doesn't affect my life. Why should I be worried? I have my other things too. So is it, for my life it was relevant. It still is. I understand its need. But I would like to see a millennial panel sitting here and telling me whether this relationship is as important to a millennial as it is to me. That's my worry.
Yeah.
How much relevance is India-Pakistan peace? How much relevant it is for the millennial generation as it is for Aziz Saab and Zahid Saab generation or for my generation? Can they relate to it really? The real relationship and not just the Bollywood and music.
Right. I think that's certainly food for thought, and in many ways a lot of this conversation is about finding new pathways for engagement. We were in Bangkok and we were talking about how social media can have a force multiplier effect, but it also can be a disruptor sometimes of important conversations that are had to be had. And from a policy perspective, the aim is always, to try and cut through the morass in a way that you can use it to advance your gains and minimize your costs. And I think that's something which, as both policymakers on the Indian side as well as the Pakistani side will look to leverage. Whether they do it in the bid of pursuing the wider goal of India-Pakistan engagement, of course, remains to be seen. I think one of the takeaways that both Aziz Saab and Zahid Saab referred to is we are a function of the political climate that we operate in. So you can't really dissociate social media from the wider context of India-Pakistan relations on any given day. Perhaps we may one day come to a point where where social media takes on a life of its own, and where it can start perhaps determining the conversation independently of what's going down in Kashmir or what the headlines are in India, in New Delhi and Islamabad. I think we're towards the end of our time. So unless there are any other questions from the audience, I'd like to thank Ambassador Aziz Ahmed Khan, Zahid Hussain and Amara Durrani for being on the panel today, and for all of you for participating. I mean, I'm just getting the statistics. Indo-Pak Narratives is currently trending at #1 in Pakistan, ahead of Imran Khan, Pakistan Day, Asif Ali Zardari. I'm not sure what the picture is on the Indian side, but I'll ask them to send us a breakup. And we'll be putting out an event report on this as well, sort of sanitizing some of the conversation that was had, trying to plug recommendations from this. And I would ask all of you to please keep an eye out for the report that Amara is currently working on, along with other professionals from Pakistan, on the role of on the role of social media and new media in enabling alternative narratives within the India-Pakistan space. We have tea laid out in the next room, so I hope all of you will stay for a cup of tea or coffee and food, which I hope looks as good as what we saw on the screen.